Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The demigods and demons then observed a fast. After bathing, they offered clarified butter and oblations into the fire and gave charity to the cows and to the brahmanas and members of the other orders of society, namely the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, who were all rewarded as they deserved. Thereafter, the demigods and demons performed ritualistic ceremonies under the direction of the brahmanas. Then they dressed themselves with new garments according to their own choice, decorated their bodies with ornaments, and sat facing east on seats made of kusha grass. Purport. The Vedas enjoin that for every ritualistic ceremony, one must first become clean by bathing either in the water of the Ganges or Jamuna or in the sea. Then one may perform the ritualistic ceremony and offer clarified butter into the fire. In this verse, the words paridaya ahatani are especially significant. A sannyasi or a person about to perform a ritualistic ceremony should not dress himself in clothing sewn with a needle. Okay, so that's a short purport. I'm going to read on a little bit as well. Text 16 and 17 and possibly 18. So this is 16 and 17. O King, as the demigods and demons sat facing east in an arena fully decorated with flower garlands and lamps and fragrant with the smoke of incense, that woman, dressed in a most beautiful sari, her ankle bells tinkling, entered the arena, walking very slowly because of her big, low hips. Her eyes were restless due to youthful pride. Her breasts were like water jugs. Her thighs resembled the trunks of elephants, and she carried a water pot in her hand. Text 18. Her attractive nose and cheeks and her ears, adorned with golden earrings, made her face very beautiful. As she moved, her sari's border on her breasts moved slightly aside. When the demigods and demons saw these beautiful features of Mohini Murti, who was glancing at them and slightly smiling, they were all completely enchanted. Purport. Srila Jai Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks here that Mohini Murti is the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a feminine form, and that the goddess of fortune is her associate. This form assumed by the personality of Godhead challenged the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune is beautiful, but if the Lord accepts the form of a woman, he surpasses the goddess of fortune in beauty. It is not that the goddess of fortune, being female, is the most beautiful. The Lord is so beautiful that he can excel any beautiful goddess of fortune by assuming a female form. Bit of psychology here. I'm going to read the next one as well. Text 19. Demons are by nature crooked like snakes. Therefore, to distribute a share of the nectar to them was not at all feasible, since this would be as dangerous as supplying milk to a snake. Considering this, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who never falls down, did not deliver a share of the nectar to the demons. Purport. It is said, Sarpa Krura Kala Krura, Sarpat Kruratara Kala. The snake is very crooked and envious, and so also is a person like a demon. Mantroshadi Vasha Sarpa Kala Kena Nivaryate. One can bring a snake under control with mantras, herbs, and drugs, but an envious and crooked person cannot be brought under control by any means. Considering this logic, the Supreme Personality of Godhead thought it unwise to distribute nectar to the demons. Text 20. The Supreme Personality of Godhead as Mohini Murti, the Master of the Universe, arranged separate lines of sitting places and seated the demigods and demons according to their positions. Text 21. Taking the container of nectar in her hands, she first approached the demons, satisfied them with sweet words, and thus cheated them of their share of the nectar. Then she administered the nectar to the demigods, who were sitting at a distant place, to make them free from invalidity, old age, and death. Purport. The Mohini Murti, personality of Godhead, gave the demigods seats at a distance. Then she approached the demons and spoke with them very graciously, so that they thought themselves very fortunate to talk with her. Since Mohini Murti had seated the demigods at a distant place, the demons thought that the demigods would get only a little of the nectar, and that Mohini Murti was so pleased with the demons that she would give the demons all the nectar. The words Vanchayan Upasancharai indicate that the Lord's whole policy was to cheat the demons simply by speaking sweet words. The Lord's intention was to distribute the nectar only to the demigods. I'll read a couple of more. Text 22, O king, since the demons had promised to accept whatever the woman did, whether just or unjust, now to keep this promise, to show their equilibrium, and to save themselves from fighting with a woman, they remained silent. Text 23, the demons had developed affection for Mohini Murti and a kind of faith in her, and they were afraid of disturbing their relationship. Therefore they showed respect and honor to her words and did not say anything that might disturb their friendship with her. Purport, the demons were so captivated by the tricks and friendly words of Mohini Murti that although the demigods were served first, the demons were pacified simply by sweet words. The Lord said to the demons, the demigods are very miserly and are excessively anxious to take the nectar first, so let them have it first. Since you are not like them, you can wait a little longer. You are all heroes and are so pleased with me. It is better for you to wait until after the demigods drink. So, I'll read one more verse. Text 24. Rahu, the demon who causes the eclipses of the sun and moon, covered himself with the dress of a demigod and thus entered the assembly of the demigods and drank nectar without being detected by anyone, even by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The moon and the sun, however, because of a permanent animosity towards Rahu, understood the situation. Thus, Rahu was detected. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mohini Murti, was able to bewilder all the demons, but Rahu was so clever that he was not bewildered. Rahu could understand that Mohini Murti was cheating the demons, and therefore he changed his dress, disguised himself as a demigod, and sat down in the assembly of the demigods. Here one may ask why the Supreme Personality of Godhead could not detect Rahu. The reason is that the Lord wanted to show the effects of drinking nectar. This will be revealed in the following verses. The moon and the sun, however, were always alert in regard to Rahu. Thus, when Rahu entered the assembly of the demigods, the moon and the sun immediately detected him, and then the Supreme Personality of Godhead also became aware of him. So, a bit of psychology there. The demons are those whose chief interest is their own pleasure, sense gratification. And the demigods are those whose chief interest is pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They may also have desire, but they dovetail that desire in the service of the Lord. So they're not disobedient to Krishna. Occasionally it may happen, sometimes, just like we read about Indra. Sometimes he gets himself in trouble because of his anxiety about maintaining his position as the king of heaven. And sometimes when he feels a little threatened by that, he does some mischief. But by and large, the demigods mean that they're always cooperating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's why they're given so many responsible posts within the universe. Because the universe itself is designed as a facility for demons. It's not a place for devotees. Except if you're preaching, that's another topic. But as far as an abode, a place to live, this Mrityu Loka, place of birth and death, is not for the demigods, it's not for the devotees. It's actually intended to facilitate the selfish interests of the demons, those who are rebellious against the Supreme Personality of Godhead, do not want to accept his rule, and therefore they're given some place to come where they can act out their fantasies of being God himself. So the material world is basically full of demons. And cooperation is very rare. Here we see that there's a cooperation between the demigods and the demons. Normally they're always fighting because the demons are always envious. They want their desires to be fulfilled at any cost. And we see that in envious people, that they'll do any kind of abominable activity if it serves their own personal interest. Yeah, that doesn't matter whether they kill babies in the womb because they can't afford or they don't want to have to work hard to support them when they come out, or whether they're throwing bombs at each other, fighting over the oil reserves or other mineral resources. Whatever it may be, that's the business of the demons. They never agree with each other, except when they feel that there's some common point of interest which will serve their own personal desires. So sometimes you get some cooperation on the basis that if we join together instead of fighting, we may achieve a particular goal and then we'll share it amongst ourselves. Because that sharing business is also very difficult, because once they achieve what they want to keep hold of it, and they don't like to give it to anybody else. So then again, fighting breaks out. So this is the nature of the material world. It's always full of strife, quarrel, argument, fighting. This is the business in the material world. So Prabhupada makes the point then, there's one nice letter that he wrote, I think in around 1974, where he talks about unity in diversity. And he explains that in the material world there's diversity but there's no agreement. And therefore there's always fighting. In the spiritual world there's diversity but there is agreement. Because everybody's centered on the one point of pleasing Krishna. And of course there's parts and parcels of Krishna. When Krishna is pleased, the devotees are automatically pleased as well. The demons, because they have no central point of interest, then they have individuality, they have their own ideas and desires, and they simply fight. There's disagreement. Everybody wants to be on top of the heap, and they'll put down anybody who attempts to remove them from their post, or even if they think that they're a threat, they'll remove them from their post by any means. One example is Stalin before the Second World War, because he had taken over the position as the leader of the Soviet Union. But the man was always paranoid. He was so paranoid about being himself removed or, being cheated by those who he thought were his allies, that in order to take charge of the army, because, that's one of the means by which governments are changed. There's some putsch or, some coup d'etat. So he ordered the murder of 40,000 commanders, anybody above the rank of captain or lieutenant in his entire army. He had them all murdered, 40,000 in one go. Because he felt, these are the leaders of the army. They may attack me or cheat me. So he had them all wiped out. Of course, that backfired on him, because when the Germans came and started to invade Russia, He had no command structure for the rest of the troops. Anyway, that's another thing. But this is an example of envy. And he was in so much anxiety, Prabhupada mentions also, that one time he had to have an operation on his stomach. So he was so afraid that he may be killed in the operation that he refused to have any anesthetic. So they had to cut him open whilst he was awake, and he was looking and seeing what was going on. That's the determination of the demons. Yeah, fear is a very powerful factor. And fear in the material world is the underlying factor of material existence. Fear of losing what one has got, fear of other living beings coming and taking your position. So that fearing propensity then is very, very powerful. So eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, these are the activities of the material world, but all of them are based on fear and envy of other living beings. Another example Prabhupada gives about, a simple example to understand what is envy. There was two friends. One of them, he said, oh, you know so-and-so, a third party that both knew. Yes. Well, he's now a Supreme Court judge. No, not him. I don't believe it. No, I saw it. It was in the newspapers. He's been appointed as a Supreme Court judge. Oh, well, then he must not be getting any salary. In other words, he's doing it for free, and that's how he got up there. So that's envy. You know, you can't give credit to anybody. This is an envious mood. You can never give credit to anybody else. Even they surpass you, still somehow or another you have to find some fault and bring them down. That's all. Criticize. So that fault-finding mentality is it's anathema to the advancement in spiritual life. Yeah. Spiritual life, Prabhupada said, depends upon cooperation. There is diversity, there is individuality, and spiritual life does not mean to wipe that out. The Mayavadis, they see that disruption in material life, disagreement, they become disgusted by it. They want to become happy, and they realize the material world is not a place where you can be happy at all. So that's good. But then their idea is that if they simply negate all individuality, all personality, and then come to this platform of so-called oneness, merging into the Brahman or whatever, spiritual suicide. Then no more disagreements, no more problems, no more trouble dealing with individuals and their desires and trying to work with them and cooperate. No, just wipe everything out and make it all one. And that's their idea of happiness. But Prabhupada, in a letter to Atreya Rishi in 1972, he explained actually that kind of idea of utopia, because I think Atreya Rishi had written to Prabhupada complaining that the devotees are not cooperating together. There's so many arguments and so many people trying to lord it over the others. So, this is impersonalism because they're dealing with each other very harshly and arguing, etc. That must be due to impersonalism. Now, Prabhupada wrote back, he said, no, actually it's the opposite. Yeah, that dealings, individual differences in dealings, is there because we are persons. So that is the symptom of personality, that there's differences. He said, we're not after utopia. There's no such thing as utopia, where everything becomes all the same. There's no differences and everybody's perfectly in agreement. And he gives the example that in the spiritual world also, there's so much disagreement. Yeah, there's so many discrepancies in individual behavior. This is another thing, that we see somebody doing something and we find fault with them. Oh, he's not doing that right, he's not doing that right. I could do that better, or somebody else could do it better. So in that way, then Prabhupada said in the spiritual world, there's also so many so-called discrepancies. And he gives the example sometimes just like Krishna, when he was thinking about Radharani, then he was in so much intense affection that he actually started trying to milk a bull instead of a cow. So that's a discrepancy, if you like, or a fault in his procedure. Or the gopis, when they're thinking about Krishna, they're so anxious to go and meet with him and in such a hurry that they start throwing on their clothes and they put them on back to front, or they put, their makeup on in the wrong place and like that. So you might say, they're not doing it properly. But the point is that they're anxious to please Krishna. And that's the point of unity. So we in Krishna consciousness don't negate individuality and personality. And that means that there will be differences, always. Yeah, everybody has their own slight take on things. Everybody is an individually conscious living being. And therefore you will have many, disparate ideas about how to proceed ahead in Krishna consciousness. So we have to learn how to accommodate that by seeing how, despite the personal differences that we have that common goal of trying to please Krishna. This is cooperation. And therefore Prabhupada always stressed that in this Sankirtan movement, it's not just kirtan. Kirtan means you're glorifying the Lord, but by yourself. But our movement, Lord Chaitanya's movement, is Samkirtan movement, which means collectively you come together and glorify the Lord. And that is the counter, the antidote, if you like, to the influence of Kali. Because the universe goes through these different phases, like the seasons, and in Kali Yuga especially, quarrel and hypocrisy is very predominant. And so the counter or the antidote to that is to learn how to cooperate. That is the highest principle, Prabhupada said, in spiritual life, to learn how to cooperate. So that way then, Prabhupada was always stressing, and if you read through his letters, you'll see time and again this business of stressing cooperation, Prabhupada having to mediate between devotees, disagreeing with each other and falling out. It was a constant theme, if you like, in the development of the Krishna consciousness movement. Prabhupada was always having to step in and, try to get the devotees to cooperate. And because he was so expert at doing that, because he always saw that higher aim, then the movement developed and spread all over the world. Yeah? He had already seen in his own situation in India, just after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's departure, how that principle of disunity, disagreement, individuals pulling this way, pulling that way, how that smashed the unity of what was a very powerful preaching force under Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So Prabhupada was very determined to try to avoid that as much as possible, and therefore he put so much stress on this principle of cooperation. If you cooperate together, you can do wonderful things, much more than each individual. If you take what each individual can do and put that together, but if you cooperate together, you can do far more than the sum total of the individual efforts, because cooperation actually pleases Krishna. It inspires the devotees in many different ways, that if you can accommodate so many different personalities and engage them in Krishna's service, everybody gets the benefit, and you see, that combined effort, how wonderful effects it can have. Individually, what can we do? Very little. So we should understand then that if we cannot cooperate together, or if we get to a point where I don't want to cooperate because this one has that fault and he's doing this wrong and she's doing that, we're just becoming victims of Kali Yuga. That's all. That is the symptom of Kali entering in, even into the ranks of the devotees, when you get this splitting and disunity. Kali cannot enter into the activities of the devotees if there is unity, if there is cooperation. So in that way, then, of course, we can cooperate on any level and at the same time accommodate the individuality of each devotee. Krishna is capable of doing that. Yeah. And when we're out preaching or when we're out dealing with others, we are representing Krishna. Each devotee has to see himself as a representative of the disciplic succession and of Krishna himself. If we have that fixed in our minds, then our behavior becomes very agreeable. Because Krishna is the well-wisher of every living being. And that is the symptom of the devotee, Ajata Shatrava. He has no enemy. He sees everybody as a friend. He sees everybody as a potential servant of the Supreme Lord. And the devotees try to help in all respects to fan that spark of surrender and service to the Supreme Lord. So that's not an easy thing to do. Here we have the demons and the demigods. They're apparently cooperating together. But Krishna knows the heart of every living being, and he knows that the so-called cooperation of the demons is highly motivated, and it's motivated by envy. Because they're thinking, if we get this nectar, then we'll conquer the demigods. Yeah. So, in order to cheat them from their purpose, their demonic purpose, then Krishna appears as Mohini Murti. Why? Because that attraction of the opposite sex is all-powerful in the material world. A materialist wants to enjoy the objects of the senses. And the chief object of the senses, of course, the enjoying spirit, that is sex desire. Of course, there's Adiras, that is the original sex desire, if you like, in the spiritual world, where everybody tries to please Krishna. In the material world, it becomes perverted, where I try to enjoy whatever comes my way for myself. That becomes lust instead of love. So Krishna assumed a form that was sure to bewilder the demons. Even though they were apparently going to cooperate together, but he understood their real purpose, and so he assumed a form which would bewilder the demons, guaranteed. That is this very beautiful form of Mohini Murti. And Prabhupada's making the point there that she was so beautiful because she's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, that even the goddess of fortune could not come anywhere near matching the beauty of the Supreme Lord in his Mohini Murti form. Because in the material world, to get the blessings or benediction of of Lakshmi Devi, the goddess of fortune, that is everybody's ambition. You know, everybody wants to get opulence, material opulence. That comes through the agency of the goddess of fortune. But the goddess of fortune is engaged in serving Krishna. That's mentioned in the Brahma Samhita, that many thousands and millions of Lakshmis are serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai. So when Krishna appeared as Mohini Murti, then his beauty surpassed even that of the goddess of fortune. In other words, he was irresistible. So the demons, when they saw Mohini Murti, they became completely bewildered. She just slightly smiled, gave them a glance, and they felt themselves to be the most fortunate living beings and submissive. Immediately they became submissive to their lusty desires. And their idea of the idea that they could enjoy with this perfect woman, that overwhelmed them and bewildered their intelligence. So even though when they sat down and she separated them from the demigods and then went to give the nectar to the demigods first, the demons didn't object, because they had, as Prabhupada said, they had so much faith in this beautiful woman that she could never cheat them. She's smiling. She likes me. So that way they became completely bewildered. And then Mohini Murti went over and gave all the nectar to the demigods, except for Rahu. And that reason why Rahu was able to apparently trick even Mohini Murti then is explained. We'll just touch upon that Krishna wanted to show the potency of this nectar that was being handed out. And so when Rahu started to swallow the nectar, at that moment, then he was detected, and then Mohini Murti chopped his head off with Sudarshan Chakra. And so the nectar didn't go down into his body, it stayed in his throat. So the head, because it had received the nectar, became immortal. The body fell down and was finished, but the head remained. And then Rahu was given a position in the heavens there. Anyway, the point there is that Mohini Murti favoured the demigods. Now that might be a point of criticism also. Because in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Sabashu Bhuteshu, I'm equal to every living being. So here is evidence of Krishna being favourable to the demigods and not being favourable to the demons. So how then can he be equal? So the answer is, again, because it's a reciprocation. Krishna is equal to everyone, but he's apparently more equal to those who are favourable to him. They want to be with him, so Krishna gives himself and makes himself available to them. The demons do not want Krishna. They want Krishna's wealth, but they don't want Krishna himself. So they get what they want, but it's not Krishna. So in that way then, there is a difference between Krishna's dealings with the demigods, or the devotees, and the demons. He's equal to them, to everyone, but at the same time, we have our desires, and that's the deciding factor whether we get or don't get. So the demons don't want Krishna. They don't want to obey Krishna. They want to have the freedom to do whatever they like. So, all right, they get that. But they're cut off from Krishna. They're cut off from immortal life. They have to remain in this material world. Birth, death, disease, and old age. The demigods, on the other hand, they may have some desires of their own, but that's subordinate to their main desire, which is to please the Supreme Lord. And so he reciprocates, and he gives them what they want. So here's the, prime example where the two groups came together for a common goal, but they achieved different results. And that point Prabhupada makes. Although the demons and the demigods sometimes may appear to be working on the same level, on the same platform, or the devotees appear to be working on the same platform as the demons, but the result is different. The labor of the devotee is not equal to the labor of the demons. The labor of the demon is to get some result, some tangible object of desire, and enjoy it. So they work very, very hard. They have their businesses. They do so many, they have so many social structures, political structures, all for the purpose of gratifying their senses. But at the end of the day, everything is lost. Yeah, you grow old, your senses grow dull, you become uninterested, and then you die. And then where you go next depends on what you've done in the past, whether you've offended other living beings in your search for sense gratification. Yeah, just the other day I was looking at a film called Food Incorporated, and it's all about how industrialization has taken over the food supply. So, horrendous stuff. There's something like 4 billion animals a year that are killed in the slaughterhouses around the world. More than that. Just butchered. And there's so many, pictures of chickens. They just slit their throats, chop their heads off. Little tiny chicks, a few days old. They have a conveyor belt. They put them on the conveyor belt. They spill over the edge. They fall into a crusher. So they're literally ground to paste alive. Billions of them every year. But nobody thinks there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, they go to the butcher's shop, they go to the, supermarket. Oh, here's a nice chicken leg. Here's a slice of beef. They don't see that as a living being, and they don't see that they've caused so much offense on such a huge scale, how they can think that there cannot be any reaction to such cruel behavior. That they're free to just do whatever they like and there'll be no reaction. That's madness. But that's lust. Lust blinds us to the effects of our activities on other living beings. Lust means me first at the expense of everybody else. This is demonic mentality. But of course, there is a supreme law. There is the law of karma. The universe is not actually run by the demons. It's run by Krishna and his representatives. And so for whatever activity a person performs, there must be a reaction. And whether they get that reaction immediately or later, it will come. So in this lifetime, the demons may get some apparent advantage and enjoyment. Sometimes that question is asked. If they're all demons, then why are they so wealthy? Why do they have so much facility? And yet we see the devotees practically don't have very much at all or nothing. So Prabhupada's reply to that was always the same, that at the end of this life, then you'll see what they will get. For the purpose of a few years of so-called enjoyment, they have to suffer like anything in the future. All the other living beings that they've offended and killed, all the reactions for that must come. So in that way then, the demons, then they're working very hard, but the fruits of their labor is very limited and temporary. And then again they have to suffer. Now the demigods, or let's say the devotees, they have to work hard. Sometimes you have to do a business, you have to support your family, etc., etc. But the work is going on, and it looks like it's the same kind of work that the demons are doing. But the end result is different. The end result is that all the work that a devotee is doing, because he dedicates the results of that work to the Supreme Lord for his pleasure, recognizing to whom things actually belong, then that's love. That's not lust. It's the opposite. It's giving, not taking. And at the end, when a devotee, or even before the end, before a devotee has to leave this body, they experience transcendental nectar. They experience transcendental life. There's no suffering for a devotee. There may apparently be some kind of suffering, but it's not really suffering. When Prabhupada was sick in Vrindavan in 1974, then I think at that time he had typhoid, very serious. He was very sick. It almost seemed like he would leave his body at that time. There was a call that went out to all the temples that everybody should start 24-hour kirtan. So it was very serious situation. And Bhagavad Das went to Vrindavan to see Srila Prabhupada. And at one point he said, Prabhupada, it's so difficult to see you suffering like this. And Prabhupada said, it's not that kind of suffering. It's not that kind of suffering. Different kind of suffering. For a devotee, they may appear to suffer, but they get shelter in their consciousness at the lotus feet of the Lord. And so it becomes tolerable. Because they know this body's temporary, it must fall. I have to be separated from it, let it go. The demons, they want to hang on until the very last second, trying to enjoy. They have no future vision. They have no idea what's going to happen next. They're full of fear and anxiety. But the devotee is not. The devotee can be serene even in the midst of the material energy. So we see, therefore, Srila Prabhupada in the last 6 or 8 months, practically his body was just skin and bone. The doctor that came to treat him in the last couple of weeks, he said that an ordinary man would be screaming in pain constantly because he has no flesh left on his body. So all his nerves must be pressing on his bones. It's extremely painful. But Prabhupada wasn't taking anything. He was just taking the medicine of the holy names. His consciousness was fixed on Krishna. Therefore, he could tolerate. So this is the position of a devotee. The result is quite different. Prabhupada also worked very hard. Yeah. Any ordinary person looking and seeing, well, they would say, well, he's working so hard, he's working even harder. Practically 24 hours a day, Prabhupada was working. Yeah. And nighttime when everybody, takes what they think is a well-deserved rest, Prabhupada was up, doing his main work of the day, which was translating his books. So the devotees and the demons superficially may appear to be on the same platform, but actually, spiritually, internally, they're on quite a different level. So the devotees, therefore, they work very hard for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, just like Arjuna. Yeah, he at one point when he was a bit bewildered, he wanted to go off and retire and go to the forest for various reasons, but he was chastised by Krishna. No, you have to fight. And fighting means you're fighting for your life. It's desperate. Every day they would go out at dawn and they would fight like anything, ferociously. There's some descriptions in the Mahabharata, some of the Kshatriyas, they would get so, there's what is it called? The scent of the blood affects your brain, actually, and you get this kind of bloodlust, and they just go wild. So they would be slashing with their swords and bows and arrows. Sometimes they would chop off their own limbs, just out of, getting so frantic in the fight. So, fighting is a horrible business. You're killing so many other living beings, you're fighting to save yourself. So you have to be angry. Yeah, if you're not angry, you can't fight. You have to be angry at your enemy. So Krishna deliberately invoked that in Arjuna, made him angry. Yeah, you have to get out there and do the work. Yeah. So for devotees, they have to work hard, just like anybody else. But the end result is very much different. The end result is the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, and therefore the individual living being, the devotee, feels tremendous satisfaction as well from that. So here you have the comparison, the differences between the two parties, the demons and the devotees. Apparently they're on the same level, but the intervention of Krishna is the demarcation. Krishna favors those who favor him. And those who don't want to know him, all right, they get bewildered, that's all. They get bewildered and put in a state where they stay in the material world. That's what's happening with the demons here. Mohani Murti bewildered them so that they would stay in the material world, because that's their actual desire. And the demigods, they want to go back home, back to Godhead, and therefore they were favored with the nectar of immortality, according to their desire. So Krishna is equal to every living being. And Prabhupada always made the point that those who are demigods can become demons, and those who are demons can become demigods. Yeah? If one just takes up this process of devotional service somehow or another, then we can be transformed from a demonic mentality into a devotional mentality. Yeah? But it's up to us. It's our choice. And therefore Krishna is always intervening and trying to give us that choice and remind us. But if we don't take it, that's up to us. That's our fault. It's not Krishna's fault. Yeah. So Krishna is not unequal in his dealings, but he reciprocates according to the desire of the individual living beings. That's the difference. Okay, so we'll finish at this point. Does anybody have any questions or comments?